The moment that made Robert Powell cry on set, playing Jesus of Nazareth, 1977. When it comes to actors that have played the role of Jesus, I have noticed that most people have the most deep emotional connection to that of Robert Powell. This might be the most recognized man who played the role of Jesus, and his name is Robert Powell. Although many people are familiar with The Chosen, there was an actor whose role, the role of Jesus, has stood for a generation. However, for this actor, there was a single moment that made him cry on set, and it was so powerful that only 10% of you might guess it correctly. For professional actors, unexpectedly breaking into tears on a movie set is uncommon. This happens when the actor feels a deep emotional connection to the character they are playing. Most people would think that it would be the scene of the cross, which would be understandable. When Robert Powell was preparing for the role, he went on an extreme diet so that he would look gaunt and emaciated during the crucifixion scenes. To drop weight quickly, he decided to forego the loaves and the fishes and restrict his diet solely to cheese, which must have been hard. Although the cross he carried wasn't as heavy as an actual wooden crucifix, it was still substantial. Powell had to drag it through a path while maintaining a convincing portrayal of physical exhaustion. Yet it was not the scene that broke him. The crucifixion scene took days. Under hot, uncomfortable conditions, Powell had to hang on the cross for extended periods. The process required him to remain still while balancing on a small support, simulating the physical toll of the actual crucifixion. Yet it was not the scene that broke him. This was the scene that broke down the actor. The actor said, "Several scenes have particularly moved me, such as the filming of the Sermon on the Mount. Franco shot it just as the sun hit the cypress groves and olive trees that I began to cry." Franco decided to keep that in the movie, just as it was. But what about the scene made the actor cry? To understand that, we will need to understand the truth about Robert Powell. Portraying Jesus in the life of Jesus wasn't just a role, it was life-changing. It became a turning point in his life. Before this role, Powell was known for playing sharp, sophisticated characters on British television. He had charisma, wit, and an undeniable charm. But this project would demand far more than acting chops. The transformation wasn't just physical. Over the 9 months of filming in the deserts of Tunisia and Morocco, Powell didn't just portray Jesus. He began to experience the depth of the character's mission, struggles, and teachings. Powell later admitted, "Before this, I had no particular interest in religion and no opinion of Christ. But playing him changed me." This isn't just a story about an actor and a role. It's about the journey of a man who discovered faith in the process. But how did this transformation begin? And what did it cost him? Before this role, Powell's knowledge of Jesus was limited to Sunday school stories, basic and incomplete. "I knew that wasn't enough," he admitted later. Determined to prepare himself, Powell read the Bible in its entirety, not just as a book, but as a deep study. Powell dove into historical accounts and theological writings, analyzing the character of Jesus like never before. He wanted to understand Jesus as both a man and the Son of God, someone who defied the political and social norms of his time. An actor has to be objective when interpreting a part, Powell explained. But after months of studying Christ's life and teachings, it would be impossible not to believe in him. The filming location itself added to the authenticity. It was part of the challenge, pushing Powell and the cast to inhabit their roles fully. As Robert Powell continued his journey to portray Jesus, he began to feel the weight of the role pressing down on him, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. This wasn't just another acting challenge, it was becoming a deeply personal experience. Jesus isn't a cozy man. He never does anything by degrees, and he expects the same from his followers. Playing him, an actor would realize the enormity of what he stood for: total commitment, total sacrifice. I had to understand Jesus as a man, Powell later reflected. His divinity is undeniable, but he also lived, struggled, and suffered as we do. That duality was key to portraying him authentically. As the production moved forward, Powell's journey only just began. The beauty and challenge of the Sermon on the Mount was a glimpse of what lay ahead, a heavy burden that would test him in ways he never expected. Seeing the crowds, he, Jesus, went up into a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." By many standards, the Sermon on the Mount is one of the shortest sermons ever preached. But no matter how short it is, it's still the greatest. Jesus started with his disciples, but by the end, there was a large crowd listening. Jesus didn't waste words. Everything he said mattered deeply. Billy Graham called the Beatitudes beautiful attitudes, which is a good way to think of them. Could this be what affected Robert deeply? This is the most well-known sermon Jesus ever gave, and it might even be the most famous sermon ever preached by anyone. The Sermon on the Mount talks about many topics. If we had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be this: it's about how to live a life that honors God, without being a hypocrite, full of love and kindness, and guided by wisdom and good judgment. Jesus talked about anger and murder, lust and adultery, divorce and remarriage, oaths, how to pray, how to fast, the narrow gate, and false prophets. Matthew 7:28-29 wraps up the Sermon on the Mount by saying, "When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, and not as their teachers of the law." Jesus warned his followers they would face hatred, hardship, and persecution. He said, "If you follow me, you'll have to carry your cross daily." Enter Jesus of Nazareth in the movie, the humble teacher everyone whispers about. Family and friends are saying good things, but the powerful fellows are getting irritated about everything he says. In the movie, by the time of the Sermon on the Mount scene, many already considered Jesus a great prophet like Moses. Jesus says he is not abolishing what Moses gave. He's filling it full. Jesus' teaching deepens and expands that first instruction from Moses. Throughout the biblical narrative, God communicates with people in various ways. But two figures, Moses and Jesus, stand out as the primary human teachers. Moses was unique in that he experienced God face to face, while Jesus is God incarnate. In the movie we see that Jesus emerges as a new Moses, coming to save not only all of Israel, but all of humanity. In that scene played beautifully by Robert, Jesus never tells people to respect him or to bow down. The crowds still recognize strong authority in Jesus' words. His teaching seems to have the ring of truth, and it fits with the Hebrew Bible's instruction they already know, yet it leaves them utterly astonished. But the emotional high of the scene also left Powell drained. He wasn't just performing, he was immersing himself in the teachings of Jesus, and the impact of that immersion was beginning to take its toll. This was more than a role. It was becoming a journey of faith and self-discovery. After months of filming, the production reached its most grueling scenes, the crucifixion. For Robert Powell, this was the ultimate test. Every detail of the scene was designed to reflect the agony of Christ's final hours, and Powell was determined to embody that suffering authentically. The physical demands of the scene were immense. The cross Powell carried wasn't a prop. It was solid wood, intentionally heavy to simulate the weight Jesus would have borne. Powell later admitted that the weight of the cross wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It gave him a sense of the incredible burden Christ must have carried, he said. But the challenges didn't stop there. The most dangerous moment came during the first take. As Powell was hoisted onto the vertical bar, the ropes holding the cross began to slip. In that split second, his life was at risk. The scene was filmed against a gray, stormy sky to capture the somber mood of the crucifixion. Despite the physical pain and the freezing conditions, Powell pushed through, driven by a deep sense of responsibility to the role. Theoretically, it wasn't supposed to be difficult, but the combination of exhaustion, hunger, and the sheer weight of the cross made it one of the hardest things I've ever done. It wasn't just acting, it was an ordeal. For Powell, the crucifixion scene was more than just a performance. It was a moment of profound connection to the story of Christ, a story of sacrifice, pain, and redemption. He later described it as a turning point, both in the film and in his own journey of faith. But the cost of this commitment was high. Powell emerged from the scene physically battered and emotionally drained. Yet, he also felt a sense of purpose, one that would stay with him long after filming ended. As the filming progressed, Robert Powell began to feel a profound internal shift. The role of Jesus was no longer just a job or a performance. It had become deeply personal. Immersed in the life and words of Christ, Powell found himself grappling with questions of faith, meaning, and purpose. Living this story, it is impossible not to be affected by it, Powell admitted. The words of Christ, once abstract and distant, became alive for him. He found himself moved by their simplicity and power, particularly the call to love, forgiveness, and sacrifice. The role also changed Powell's perspective on humanity. Surrounded by people from different cultures and backgrounds, he saw firsthand the universal power of Jesus' message. Whether or not they shared his faith, everyone on set seemed drawn to the story's themes of hope and redemption. As Powell continued to explore the character of Jesus, he began to see the world, and himself, differently. He admitted to becoming more humble, more introspective, and more aware of his own shortcomings. The role was changing him, shaping him in ways he hadn't expected. "I think I'm a different person now," Powell said. "Playing Jesus has made me think deeply about what it means to live with purpose and compassion." The internal shift Powell experienced wasn't just about faith. It was about finding a new sense of direction and meaning in his life. Through the role of Jesus, he began to see the world not just as an actor, but as someone deeply connected to the story of humanity. "I was working 11 hours a day, barely eaten. The combination of nerves, fatigue, and the intensity of the role made it one of the most taxing experiences of my life." The relentless schedule and harsh conditions of filming in North Africa took a toll on Powell's body. The scorching heat, cold nights, and sandstorms added to the challenges. Yet, Powell refused to let the discomfort affect his performance. "Sometimes I was so focused on the role that I didn't even notice the injuries," Powell admitted. On one occasion, he walked into a metal grating, cutting himself badly. Another time, the incense used in a scene left his lungs burning, but he brushed it all off, determined to stay in character. Despite the challenges, Powell found moments of reflection. He often wrote in his journal, capturing his thoughts about the role, the lessons he was learning, and the ways it was changing him. These quiet moments helped him process the enormity of what he was experiencing. As the production neared its conclusion, Robert Powell found himself reflecting on the immense significance of the story he had been living for months. The life of Jesus wasn't just a script to him anymore. It had become a lens through which he viewed the world. Powell was struck by the simplicity and power of Jesus' message. "What amazes me," he said, "is that 2,000 years after his death, so few people actually live by his teachings. Love, forgiveness, and humility, they're universal, yet they're still ignored in so many parts of the world." Powell couldn't help but draw parallels between the world of Jesus' time and the modern era. Religious divisions, political unrest, and the struggle for justice were as present in the 20th century as they were in ancient Judea. "He shall not, I hope, have died in vain," Powell said with quiet determination. "I think I'm a much humbler person now," he admitted. "Jesus was the ultimate example of sacrifice and selflessness. Portraying him has made me more aware of my own flaws and the ways I can improve." Powell found himself drawn to the teachings of Christ, not just as a historical figure, but as a source of wisdom and inspiration. The role had opened his eyes to the deeper truths of life, truths that he carried with him long after the cameras stopped rolling. For Powell, the story of Jesus wasn't just about the past. It was a call to action for the present and the future. Through his performance, he hoped to inspire others to live with more compassion and understanding, just as Jesus had taught. As the final scenes wrapped and the cameras stopped rolling, Robert Powell was left with more than just memories of a challenging role. The experience had transformed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. But beyond the personal change, Powell began to wonder, could his portrayal of Jesus inspire others to see the world differently? Returning to normal life after portraying such a monumental figure was no easy task. Powell found himself reflecting on the ways the role had shaped him, not just as an actor, but as a person. There's a certain weight that comes with playing Jesus. It's not something you leave behind easily, but I think that's a good thing. It reminds me to live with more intention, to think about how my actions affect others. For Powell, the role had been a journey of self-discovery. He had started as an actor with little connection to faith, but he emerged with a newfound respect for the life and teachings of Jesus. The role also left Powell with a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices Jesus made. He was more than just a figure of history, Powell reflected. He was a man who gave everything for his mission. That kind of devotion is rare and humbling to think about. The life of Jesus received critical acclaim, with Powell's performance hailed as one of the most powerful portrayals of Christ ever captured on screen. But for Powell, the greatest success wasn't the accolades. It was the hope that the film might inspire people to live with more kindness and understanding. If this film brings even one person closer to understanding the message of Christ, Powell said, then it's all been worth it. Robert Powell's journey wasn't just about playing a role. It was about stepping into a story that has shaped humanity for centuries. Through the challenges, the pain, and the profound moments of connection, Powell emerged changed, a man who had come to see the world through the lens of compassion, humility, and faith.